Welcome to another Fratello Watches video. I'm Mike Stockton.
And I'm Gerard.
And we are coming to you from The Hague. Today we've got some pretty exciting news, and we're actually filming this quite a bit before you get to see it, so we've got a prototype on our hands, but we have got the new Aquastar Deepstar, which is a pretty faithful, although modernized reinterpretation of, I think, one of the more innovative and, let's say, hate to use that word iconic, but certainly among collectors, iconic dive chronographs from the early 1960s. And this is a brand that we really haven't seen in some number of years, although you're certainly familiar with them, whether it's regatta watches and other things.
Yeah, I've seen some of the originals before. I had one in my collection as well. And so I was very happy to see that the design and the type of watch was resurrected.
Yeah, and that's something we see more and more of these days for certain. But Aquastar, as mentioned, has really been out of focus for quite a long time, and it's actually Rick Murray. For those of you who are familiar with dive watches, Rick is a well-known enthusiast, and he even had his hand in Doxa for several years and was heavily involved with bringing back the Doxa sub, the no-T case, so the really original Doxa sub case. So he's a big enthusiast, and he's also involved with Tropic and Isofrane, and one of his passion projects for a long time was trying to get Aquastar back, and he's done it here. So
yeah.
And with the Deepstar, we're taking a look at probably the most famous and frankly collectible watch that the company made. They made a number of watches using this style of skin diver case, which we've seen on many brands from the 60s, and they even crossed over into Japan with some early Citizen and Seiko 62 Mas.
As well, yeah, it's pretty much the same shape and idea of casing, sure, yeah.
Yeah, and the watch that was out in the 1960s, first of all, very valuable today. We often see them on places like Chrono 24 for more than 10,000 euros, and they're watches that had kind of a gray dial, notable for this really big 30-minute sub-second or 30-minute counter on the right side, and this sort of interesting, I don't know how you call that, kind of a double triangle.
Yeah, it's more or less it's an item which shows if the watch is running, which is important to know, of course, when you depend on a watch for diving.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know, it's a double triangle hand almost on both sides of the center.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some really nice loomed hands and some very distinctive markers that carried through to other Aquastar models of this era, and then some loom pips. But when you see these watches for sale, they typically have a lot of damage to the dials. They've gone quite tropical, to use a collector's term, but
yeah,
they probably let in some water over the years.
Might be as well. I mean, it was meant for diving, and it was. I mean, it wasn't probably the type of casing which was the best waterproof. It was waterproof, of course, it was not to a large extent. It's just a regular good diving watch, but
yeah,
not too far. Yeah, I like the design of the dial. It's very, as you said, almost iconic. It's immediately known as an Aquastar. If you see a dial like this, there's hardly any other watch using this type of dial, this layout of dial with one large sub-dial in it. It's I love it a lot. It looks good.
Yeah, very, very different from other watches during the period when a lot of watches really did look the same. And talking about names, so the Aquastar wasn't sold in retailers. They were only sold dive shops, and because of that, you see generally Aquastar's name on the dial. And there were Aquastar pieces, but they also sold through other dive equipment makers, and I think even in other countries, due to customs, they had other names such as Lorenz, Jean Richard, Duvard. So sometimes you see them co-branded as well. And what I think is also kind of an iconic thing about Aquastar, and you can see this on a lot of their pieces, was the case back.
Yeah.
So they had this phenomenal, I don't know how you'd call it, almost like just this ridged type of grooving. And I think you needed a really special tool to open these up.
Yeah, yeah, I think so as well. It looks like that, and that might be the reason for this special type of case bag as well, that not everyone
could get in there.
Could get in there
let water
for
in.
nothing. Yeah, right. And but I'm sure there will be a tool, a regular tool as well to open it with. But I think the idea was a bit like that.
Yeah, and it looks good. Really, it really looks good here.
It does. So, yeah.
But let's talk a little bit more historically here about the function of this watch, because just aside from telling time and having a chronograph, it brought something else quite interesting to the game. And if you're familiar with dive watches, there are all kinds of bezels, especially during this period, that were trying to tell you different things aside from just how long you've been underwater. And what this watch brought forward, and it was patented, was a very unique bezel, which by the way has a Loomed pip, so you can see elapsed time for how long you've been underwater. But if you look closer, it's got this really interesting dual scaled bezel that honestly upon first view doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But actually they were trying to do something far more innovative before dive computers came into focus.
Yeah, because the original patent, we're talking about the 60s now. So there were no dive computers or hardly any electronic dive computers to tell this kind of information, and except for telling, and even more than just telling the time that you've been underwater, which can be timed of course with this watch, but not even that easy, because the scale isn't meant for that. There's another scale, a quite complex scale, which comprises two different scales in fact, and together with a little table could be used to determine the time what you need to make a repetitive dive. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you dive, there will be a certain amount of gas inside of your blood, which normally goes out again after a certain amount of time, and before it all goes out, it will be out of your blood. You don't want to dive again.
Yeah,
it's better not to. Otherwise, you have to calculate different times for decompression and things. So it's better to wait until the time that all the gas is left from your body, and then you can go dive again. And that's what this special scale was meant for. It was quite unique, in fact.
Yeah, so that's an interesting subtlety. If you take a look at the doxas, you have this no deco bezel, which tells you how long you can stay at a certain depth and then come up without doing decompression stops. Yeah. But it doesn't mean that you can come right back up, grab a new tank of air, go right back down and keep doing that all day long.
Exactly. That's,
right?
Those bezels were just the no deco bezels. They were meant for the first dive. And if you make a second dive quite shortly after your first dive, there's different times of no deco time. So that's what this watch is able to tell you, when you could dive again, to use the regular tables for no decompression.
Yeah, so you can imagine for professionals who are working all day, they weren't being paid to just dive once. You know, they had to dive multiple times in a day. And apparently the inventor of this system was told that yes, some of these divers who were doing these no deco dives were in fact getting the bends. So basically you can use this scale, as said with a table, to measure time once up on the boat, and we're back on dry land, and the hour hand moves to what's called a normal area, and that tells you when it's safe to go back in. We're hoping that Aquastar is going to provide that table again. Obviously people probably won't be using it, but it's a really, really neat, historically correct addition that I hope that they provide.
Yeah.
So actually a fascinating watch. If we talk about the modern version compared to the historic piece, so these historic watches were about 38 to 38.5 millimeters in diameter. They used a Valjoux 23 column wheel manual wind movement, and they were pretty thin. Yeah, this new watch takes things to a more modern level, and you know we'll talk about that in a little bit on what we think about that, but. This watch comes in at 40.5 millimeters. The lug to lug is 49 millimeters, and you have a 22 millimeter lug width. And as you can see, the watch comes on a brand new Tropic strap. It also comes with a cordovan leather strap, and I think early in 2021 there will be some type of fairly faithful beads of rice bracelet. So it's larger, yeah, and it is not a thin watch at 14.8 millimeters.
No.
It does have 200 meters of water resistance, a screw down crown, domed sapphire crystal, and it uses a Lejeune Perret automatic movement with a column wheel. So it's actually quite nice to use. It's very smooth, but they have made some modern upgrades here. And I'm just curious, what do you think about that?
Well, the form is quite equal to the original. The shape as well, but the dimensions certainly aren't. This is a way more substantial watch. It feels as well like a modern watch. It's as said, it's thicker, it's larger, and well, the whole production and the whole construction of everything is just a modern watch, looking like a watch from the early days, but it certainly has a different feel to it.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at, we're looking at the quality of the dial and the bezel, the casework, etc., and it's really at a very high standard. And like you said, it looks retro, but you could perhaps envision this competing with more modern diving chronograph watches. So, you know, we had one of our team members who certainly has larger wrists than we do try it on, and he loved the size. So I think if you're a vintage person but wearing a 38 millimeter watch that, by the way, you have to be pretty careful with, is a concern, you know, this might be more suitable for more everyday type wearing.
Yeah, well, it's not a large watch. In fact, it's way larger it's much larger than the original, but still, 14.5 millimeters is quite regular for a sporty chronograph. Sure. I mean, it's not 42, it's not 44, it's not 45. You see all those sizes as well in modern chronographs and certainly divers chronographs. So still, it's not a huge watch, but compared to the original, it's way more substantial.
Yeah. So Aquastar is going to offer these on their website, so you'll be able to order these directly. They're going to make 300 of these, and you know the case back notes 1965 to 2020, so they're calling out 65 as the year that these were introduced. Pricing. So pricing is interesting. This comes in at just shy of $3,600, which is a pretty fair chunk of change, no doubt. But we like the finishing. Again, the movement feels good. I think that, you know, as a limited model and something that is done well, it should find fans. I think in that price range, certainly there's competition.
Yeah, there's competition, but I think it's very adequate for a watch like this, feeling like this and constructed like this and finished like this watch with a nice movement as well. I think the price is adequate. It's on the right point.
Yeah. And I think most importantly for fans of Aquastar, the brand, this really represents the beginning. And you know, if they're successful and things go well, and we're expecting they will, we expect to see more models. And I know I have an old, what's known as a 63, which is just the three-hand diver with a rotating internal bezel, similar case, and hopefully we'll see some things like that coming forward. So I think well done, a good reintroduction.
Yeah, sure.
Well, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.
And don't forget to subscribe to Fratello Watches to check out more of our videos that are on the way. Thanks again.